Hello, everyone, and good morning, and welcome to another historian's interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia. Many of you know me as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. And joining me today is an historian making their official debut here on the show. She's an historian of early modern Sicily, focused on cultural and intellectual history, Mediterranean identity, and early modern concepts of race. She is also a writer and editor of Age Sicily, a scholarship dedicated to Sicilian and Southern Italian history from late antiquity to early modernity. She's an instructor of history at Kent State and the University of Akron, and she is also the creator of the Sicilian School on Instagram, where she explores and details the history of Sicily. So, without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to our guest, historian, teacher, and content creator, Anne Maltempi. Anne, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome, Anne. Awesome. I'm so excited to finally talk with you to learn more about yourself as well as your content that you are making, not just for H Sicily, but also the Sicilian School. So, is there anything further you'd like to share with our viewers and listeners about your background? Anything that wasn't covered?
No, I mean, if anyone's interested, I do have a couple publications that you could find online. One with Mediterranean studies, another one with Renaissance papers, just a few articles. And I'm working on a book manuscript, but that's not available yet. But I'll be posting all about that on my social media pages. So if anybody follows me on social media, you'll know when the book's coming.
Awesome. Awesome. So, as a little overview for our viewers and listeners, can you tell us about your Instagram, the Sicilian School, and sort of how that came about?
Yeah, sure. So I actually started the Sicilian School over last summer. It was around last June or July. And I had been thinking about doing a social media page based on my research in Sicily for quite some time. I was a little nervous about getting started because I'd never really done any content creation of any sort, really, when I started. So I knew very little about it. The only thing I really used as kind of a formula, I guess, was I would watch a lot of reels. Um, and I was kind of seeing what other people were doing and what might fit my own personal style and what I wanted to accomplish. And then I took this workshop with another content creator named Miss Lee Esposito, who's wonderful. And I talked to her a little bit, and she had some really good insight because she'd had a social media page for quite a while, like 4 or 5 years already. And she gave me some, pointers about how long reels are and what you want to
Mhm.
do with them. And what I loved about the idea of content creation that I thought would go really well with what I was trying to do is, studying history, sometimes it's very difficult to show people how history is relevant, especially if
Absolutely.
you're yeah, especially if you're doing older history like pre 18th century, right? It's very hard to get people engaged and help them see why it affects and is influential in the world around them. So I thought content creation would actually be the perfect vehicle for that because it's very modern, it's very new.
Mhm.
Younger audiences are following them, and it allows you the ability to show how, hey, this stuff that we talk about today, racial identities, gender identities, class struggles, they're very much alive in the 1500s or the 1400s. They may present in different ways, but they're there. And the seeds are planted for them. What we see happening today, we saw the foundations for hundreds of years ago. So I liked the idea of merging a new technology with a way of showing a narrative history that could blend our issues with what was happening in the past. So after I did the workshop and after I talked with family and friends and, kind of got some ideas from different people, I said, you know what? I think I'm just gonna go for it, and I'm gonna see what happens, and we'll see if people like it or if they don't. Hopefully they do. So I did my first reel, which was the Michelangelo and the Genius of Palermo kind of compare and contrast video. And it got a lot more views in 24 hours than I was expecting. I think it had like 500 views in 24 hours. And I was like, okay, well, you know what? Maybe this is something I could do. So that's how it started, and that's what happened.
Well, that's incredible. That is amazing to hear. And what I also think is very fascinating, which I absolutely love about your content, is it talks about the history of Sicily and southern Italy, which I feel doesn't get a lot of scholarship because when we think of Italian history as a whole, of course, we think of, the Roman Empire in
Yeah.
the classical age. And when we get to the medieval era, we have the Kingdom of Italy that was ruled by the Lombards,
Yeah.
and then the Holy Roman Empire. And then we get into the late medieval period. We think of the Papal States
Yeah.
and ruled by Venice, the Vatican, the Kingdom of Naples, and so forth. But when we get to like the early modern period, I mean, yes, we know a little bit of Italy, the central part, as well as northern Italy and Tuscany and those regions. But
Mhm.
Sicily kind of gets overlooked, and the rest of southern Italy kind of gets like shafted, which is
Yeah.
very, very unfortunate. So I am curious, Anne, where did you sort of discover this passion for
Mhm.
history growing up? Was it something that you've always been fascinated with, or did this passion sort of come later in your life?
Yeah. So the Renaissance was always the Renaissance as a movement always was interesting to me. Even when I was a kid, I always thought it was fascinating. And then, this may sound a little bit silly, but like learning that the Ninja Turtles were named after Renaissance artists, I thought was cool. When I got a little bit older. I do have Sicilian parents. I'm first generation American. Um, and I did not intend to study Sicily when I started graduate school. I was just interested in Renaissance literature and poetry primarily. So I was actually studying English literature. I was studying Shakespeare. Um, and I thought that I was going to get my PhD in literature. For various reasons, I shifted into history because I always liked looking at the literature as kind of an artifact of
Mm,
the history rather than looking at the literature just for the sake of looking at the literature. So I decided history might be a better fit for me as a field, but I was still intending to study the English. I was intending to study Tudor Stuart Britain because I'd been studying Shakespeare. It seemed like the logical step to just move into this field.
right.
But Tudor Stuart Britain is very, very saturated. I mean, there's a lot of stuff about Tudor Stuart
Yes.
Britain. And I think, like I've said before, in part, it was even my own stunted creativity. I just wasn't finding anything there that was really unique, that was really like pulling at me to talk about. So I speak Italian. I grew up actually speaking Sicilian dialect at home. So I said, talking to various colleagues and friends of mine, maybe I should look at Italy since I have this language ability. And with my background being Sicilian, I was like, hey, everyone talks about Florence in the Renaissance, but I rarely hear about Sicily in the Renaissance. Is it because I've just overlooked it, or am I missing part of the history? So I started doing some research, and lo and behold, especially in the English language in most Anglophone countries, there is almost nothing talking about Sicilian history in the 15th and 16th centuries. You'll find quite a bit on the Norman monarchies in the Middle
Mm,
Ages. You'll find quite a bit on Sicily in literary scholarship much later, like once you're looking at authors like Pirandello and Verga, and like, you have Il Gattopardo right now, the leopard on Netflix and stuff like that, but that's significantly later history, right?
right.
But that period, that 15th and 16th century, it's almost like there's a hole there. Like nobody thought it would be useful to study that. And particularly in English speaking countries, the center for that period becomes Florence. And there's lots of reasons behind that.
Mm,
So I said, well, since it's not here, somebody might as well do it. So why not take a stab at it? And that's what led me to my research.
Awesome. And now I'd like to talk about being a part of HCICI, which I had a chance to look into,
Mhm.
and I love the scholarship that they are producing.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about your aha moment of when you wanted to be a part of that incredible scholarship group?
Sure. So I have to give a shout out to another friend of mine, Jessica Minieri, who is also on Instagram. Wonderful historian. She's fantastic, very sweet, very warm, very bright. Um, H. Cicely was really kind of her pet project. Like she's really the
Okay.
architect of it. And a couple summers ago, she reached out to me in an email and she said, HNet Reviews is a big database for a lot of historians, but no H. Cicely existed within HNet. So she said, no H. Cicely exists, which I did know. She's like, but I want to put together a formal proposal. So would you want to be one of the members within the proposal? We can all work together to do this. And I said, absolutely 100% count me in. So she reached out to me and uh, I want to say like 8 to 10 other historians. We're all working on Sicily within the US, Canada, and Europe. And we all worked together to do the proposal on a Google Doc, just we're kind of adding in our ideas here and there. And sure enough, she got it through. So it's been really wonderful to see people finally having this space online to share their work about Sicily. And it didn't exist until about 2 years ago. So, she's been great, doing the Instagram page for it and opening up an X account for it and, everything. So I'm really proud to be able to say that I helped work with her and so many others that collaborated on it to create this page. It's been amazing.
That's incredible. And I've been seeing, a lot of stuff like that within the historian community, within the history field, because content creation is now like on the rise for historians. It's a new avenue to
Mhm.
share history and also leads into, other questions about, building one's brand, what we want to teach history, how we want to be approached when we talk about history and so forth. And that'll be touched on in the business portion of the interview. But now let's talk about, you know, creating these reels,
Mm.
discussing the content within these videos and so forth. And so walk me through it. So you've now created your Instagram account, the Sicilian School, and as you mentioned earlier, you made your first reel, which blew up and exceeded your expectations. When you were making that reel, what were the goals you had for yourself as the historian, but also the promises you were making to your future followers and fellow historians?
So I think for myself, there were specific points I wanted to hit. So I wanted to talk about the fact that I wanted to show in an entertaining way that there is Renaissance art in the Italian South that is just as beautiful, even if we don't talk about it as much as there
Mm-hmm.
was in the North. So I thought doing that by taking, one of the most famous pieces of Renaissance art, Michelangelo's David, which I mean is like the icon of Renaissance art, right?
Absolutely.
And comparing it to another statue, and not just another statue, but the representation of a city, just like David was. I mean, because David really is the representation of Florence. That's why you have, a billion Davids you could look at. I'm exaggerating slightly, but that's why you have so many Davids in Florence, right? Well, there's like 7 or 8 geniuses of Palermo too, because he becomes this kind of adopted symbol of the city as well. Um, so I kind of wanted to show that compare and contrast to say not just the art is there, but the culture is there. The ideologies that people are talking about and spreading are there. The kind of intellectual background is there while not making it so theoretically and historically dense that it would be unapproachable.
Right.
Right. So that's what I was really trying to accomplish with that particular video. And I think the promise I would make to my followers from that is this is the kind of content you can see here. It is about a space in time that is not talked about very often, that you might also find interesting, where we can also see these kind of cool ideas propping up that we can still see now. Um, so looking at history as not just a set of dates and data, but also seeing the process of history being made and how it moves through time and how we can understand it, hopefully learn from it, and hopefully realize that it still happens around us constantly. We're constantly making history.
Hmm.
And I think as far as fellow content creators, I'm kind of stumbling my way through it. I hope that maybe people can learn from my mistakes, or maybe learn from my models if they think they're good. Maybe I can learn from them. I remember one of the things that was plaguing me when I first started this was the captions. The captions were miserable
Mm,
because they I was saying some foreign words so they wouldn't get picked up, or they'd get picked up as something totally different. And then
yes.
I don't know why. I don't know if it's because I had an old phone, or because I recently got a new one, or if it was because like the app wasn't updating properly, but it would do this thing where I would fix the captions, and then when it would upload the reel, it would use the old messed up captions. So it's a process. It's all a learning process. And like I said, I hope for fellow content creators, they can either learn from my mistakes or even reach out to me and say, hey, you know what would help with this? Because I don't take offense to that. I greatly appreciate it. So if there's anyone who's more tech savvy out there, please, by all means, um, let me know. But yeah, so I think the idea of creating content that's interesting, but also helping you to learn something new was just the ultimate goal.
That's incredible. And 100%, I absolutely agree. And also, just to add further point to what you said, and is, when we again talk about, the history of Italy, we always think of, the central and the northern
Mhm.
provinces of Italy, never southern Italy or even Sicily. And interestingly, as I found in my own research, southern Italy and Sicily has its own identity, which people
Mhm.
don't take into consideration when we talk about, the history of Italy.
Yeah.
Viewers and listeners, the Italian peninsula, had its own diverse subculture for many, many years, even during the age of antiquity. If you look
Oh
at,
yeah.
the different groups of people who lived in the Italian peninsula before the rise of the Romans, and the Romans were just one of many. If I'm not mistaken, they were actually probably one of the smallest groups of, the Latin leagues and the
Oh yeah.
Italian leagues, and yet, of course, they rise and dominate. But after the central part of Italy crumbles, you have the Ostrogoths, you have the Lombards, you have all of those people who take the Italian kingdom, but Sicily sort of has its own identity where you have elements of North Africa and
Mhm.
the Arab influence, which I find incredibly fascinating.
Yeah.
And from that point, Anne, what was the reaction like from family and friends who A, learned that you were doing this, and B, watched the first reel when it became live on your Instagram?
I have to say, I have an amazing group of family and friends because everyone has been overwhelmingly supportive. I mean, my parents have always been supportive of even my graduate career going through. My husband too has always been very supportive of everything I've been doing academically and online. Some of my friends, I think, were a little bit surprised because I tend to be um, kind of reserved a lot. And they're like, oh, wow, like you're really good at this. You're a really good public speaker, like you should do this more. And I think it's not so much public speaking, but I go into like teaching mode when I do my reels. And I've been teaching for quite a while now. Um, but everyone has been overwhelmingly supportive. The most I've gotten is sometimes I'll get a comment here or there from like, general people watching on the internet or things like that. And sometimes I will go in and explain if I think I need to clarify, or I will explain a point that maybe they might have missed. I also, or I might have missed. I mean, we have when I first started my reels, the reels were only a minute and a half.
Mm.
So I had a minute and a half to cover, in some cases, very broad topics, which is why I started doing series instead of just doing like a reel at a time, because it would be absolutely impossible to cover the history you've mentioned of Sicily in a minute and a half. Like it's just not doable. We do have 3 minutes now, which is
Mm.
slightly better, but still not great. Because quite frankly, I could talk about the multicultural past of Sicily for 3 months, let alone 3 minutes. So the issue becomes what you can cover within the reels. And I try to cover the highlights. And then if I need to add something, sometimes I'll put it in one of the notes below. Or, I mean, I am perfectly happy with people asking questions like, I don't know if you clarified this very much, or can you talk about that a little bit more? Can you do a reel on this, And I'm more than happy to take suggestions. So, but yeah, I think the real issue becomes what you can cover in that amount of time. But everyone in my circle of people has been incredibly supportive of this, so it's been nice.
That's amazing. And would you say that in a way you've gotten some element of, I want to say validation, but the overall feedback you've got, it was exactly what you set out for with your goals, that you wanted to create history, specifically the history of Sicily and southern Italy, to where it was engaging,
Mhm.
but it wasn't bogged down by academic jargon, that the average, Jack or Jill could understand the history and follow along.
Yes, absolutely. Because I think one of the drawbacks we have sometimes in academia is we do use a lot of jargon, and sometimes that can be very off-putting, even though you really should try to make your history and your points as clear and understandable as possible, right? Because
Mhm.
otherwise, like, what's the point? What if you're not reaching people, if they're not understanding what you're saying, what's the point? Um, and I have to say, I think the channel has exceeded my expectations. I was not expecting in the first 5 months, I was getting about 1,000 followers a month. Um, and I was not expecting that. I was expecting to get maybe 50 to 100, like I was being maybe kind of conservative with my estimate. But I didn't want to go into it thinking, okay, this is going to blow up, because this wasn't a page that I created for the purposes of like monetary use or anything like that. Quite frankly, I created it more because I do teach, but what I teach is primarily world histories
Mm.
for incoming undergraduates. I don't get to teach about Sicily. So I created the page in a way because I was like, well, if I can't teach about my work in a university, I'm going to teach about it in a classroom I create for myself. And I think online can do that for me. Um, so I created the page for the purposes of having this kind of outlet where I could teach my passion. So it wasn't about like gaining massive amounts of followers. But then when I saw the page becoming more popular, I did get some validation, because I was like, okay, this is cool, because that means other people are connecting with this. And that's amazing. It's not just, geeky me reading a bunch of books about Arab Sicily and thinking this is really cool and people need to know about it. Like, people really find this interesting. And I find a lot of people, one of the things that I was so fascinated by is how many people still, to a degree, like, hold to these identities in their past. Like, it's really amazing how many people are like, "Oh, I actually looked up my family history and I'm part Norman," or, "I know that I have a lot of Arab in my background even though my family's from Sicily," And that's
Mhm.
really cool to see. So, I love that people are connecting with it, and I do get a great satisfaction knowing that they're enjoying my page, they're enjoying my content, and maybe they can see a little more of their own histories within the narrative that I'm providing for them.
That's incredible. And I absolutely love that. That is one of the many driving factors, for the Sicilian School. And I imagine also for your other work too, which
Mhm.
includes the articles you
Mhm.
have written, which we'll touch on in a little bit. Before we get to that, there is probably a very powerful question, which I did want to ask you. And it's one of few reflective questions, which is, in the field of history, whenever we work on something entirely new, a little bit of ourselves is imprinted on the work, whether it's a presentation, whether it's a dissertation or thesis or whatever, or even a magazine article. A little bit of ourselves is imprinted on it. And we want to share that with, viewers around the world or listeners around the world. And with the rise of social media, it is a double-edged sword for independent creators. Yes, on one side, you are able to reach a wide audience,
Mhm.
but on the other side, we do leave ourselves exposed and open to hate speech, trolls, spam, and sometimes individuals who call out our credentials, our academic standing. I've talked with a lot of historians on this, and it is very, very, I want to say prevalent, but it is on the rise much more than it was before. And
Mhm.
all that could definitely impact and historians' mental health and their well-being. And that
Absolutely.
can also make them reconsider, do they want to continue pursuing history or pursuing history in another medium? And as also, imposter syndrome is going to be in the back of everyone's mind. So I am curious for you, Anne, did you ever have those moments of heightened anxiety or imposter syndrome? And if so, or if not, what disciplined you to continue talking about Sicilian history and Southern Italian history, as well as going into other avenues where it's your writings, your
Mhm.
scholarship, as well as contributing to H Sicily with your fellow colleagues?
That's a great question. I think most of us suffer from imposter syndrome, and I don't know that it ever goes away, um,
Mm,
because it's always kind of there, right? At least for me, it's always kind of there because you're always kind of like, oh gosh, well, is this good enough? Is this writing good enough? Did I say this clear enough? Did I hit the major points the way I wanted to? Does this sound dumb? I mean, everything I will often walk into academic conferences or rooms in academia and be well aware of the fact that I'm the dumbest person in the room. Now, whether that is the case or that is my own perception, I think a lot of us in history have that. I think in part, and I hate to say this, but I think in part academia contributes to that because it is such a field that is just there's an abundance of rejection, whether you're
mm,
talking about like writing rejection, job rejection. I mean, there is a lot of it. So over time, I think you start to recognize, and what I love actually that I've seen happening lately is a lot more historians and scholars of the humanities in general have been talking about their rejections. And I think that's so helpful to do because there's strength in numbers, right? And you can
yes.
kind of see that, hey, this person that I really look up to whose work is really great also got rejected a bunch of times. Like maybe it's
Hmm.
not just me. Um, so I think that is so helpful. I went to and I actually shared this on my Instagram page in the stories a few months back. I went to a conference in October, and at the time I was working on this book chapter, which is I think gonna come out probably at the end of this year sometime. Um, and it was the first time I was really contributing to an edition like this because it's an edited anthology with a lot of different scholars in it. So I was a little nervous about my entry. Is it going to hold up with the others? Is it good enough? And I met this group of women who had been historians in the field for much longer than me. Like
Mm.
they have lifetimes of careers in the field. And they were talking about how they had exactly the same fears and insecurities when they were writing that I did. And that was just so comforting to me because I'm like, these women are titans of their fields and they have the same like concerns that I do. So I think opening up, talking about it, recognizing that it isn't a you problem, but a symptom of the system we're in
Hmm.
is extremely helpful. As for the social media aspect of it, I think everyone's going to get a troll. Everyone's going to get those people that are on there. I don't know if they're doing it just for like rage bait or what. So I have a policy. And my policy is I haven't run into it super often. I know a lot of people that have actually gotten a lot worse comments on their videos than I have. And I don't know if it's my content that maybe lends to less of that. I don't know. I don't know what it is. But the few comments I have gotten, I will try to clarify my point once. If your comment back is very much indicating that you did not read my point or you don't care, you just want to fight about it, I'm done. I will try one time. But I'm not going to get there and get into a debate with somebody who maybe has a legitimate point and just sees something differently than me, or maybe is just doing it because that's what they like to do is be contrarian on the internet. If so, that's fine. I'll try once and then I'm done. And some comments I just don't even bother responding to because if you have a point about the content in the video, I'm glad to talk about it with you. But if it's just something like, "Oh, who cares about this? Why'd you make this video?" I have nothing to say to that. Like, then don't watch it, I guess. Just scroll through, you know?
Yeah.
So I'll try once, but thankfully, I've only gotten a few comments like that. I haven't gotten anything. Most of the comments that I have received have been overwhelmingly positive, and I'm very, very, very grateful for that because even when I started my page, that was one of my fears is like, oh my God, you know, am I going to get crazy comments on my videos or something? So I was just kind of like stealing my nerves for that. But thankfully, I haven't gotten anything so far that's been super crazy.
Well, that's good. That is very good, and kind of like a little fun question, which I love to hear everyone's thoughts on. I know it's not really up for debate like it's talked about in like the independent circles or historian circles, but I find it very fascinating, which is one of my previous guests, who's an author, made the comment on her post that the golden age of independent creators sort of came about during the COVID years, the lockdown years. And
Mhm.
a lot of people have had their thoughts on it. Some have argued that the independent, or I should say, the golden age was on the rise and quarantine just sped up the process, while others argue that a golden age is here and it was a result of the lockdown. And some have given valid points that, a lot of authors, historians, content creators got their standing, their startup during the lockdown years. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. And as an historian and a fellow content creator, where do you see yourself on this debate?
That's a good question. I think if I had to weigh in, I think this kind of content creation was on the rise, but I do definitely think COVID sped up the process.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it didn't for me so much because I actually uh I was writing my dissertation during lockdown. I actually defended in the summer of 2020.
Wow,
So
that was really early.
that was a rough experience. That was crazy. But I mean, it all went well, it was fine. But I do think a lot of friends of mine that had already defended, that were starting their careers, did see the internet as a viable way to connect. right? Because that's what it does. It helps connect you with people. Um, and you can actually, speaking virtually, can do a lot from your basement with a ring light and a computer, right?
That's true.
So I think, especially for people who are so drawn and are so um uh trained to teach, it just makes sense to try and do something virtually if you can't do it in person. So I do think, and I think if we are going to talk about a virtual golden age, I think
Mm.
probably we're probably in it right now. I might change my mind in a few years. I might look back and say, what was I talking about? I think we're in it right now, but I do think COVID and the lockdown really spurred the process. If I were to make an analogy, a historical analogy, I would say that what COVID and the pandemic were to this virtual rise in intellectualism, the plague was to the Renaissance.
That's a fair comparison because that is, very, very true. And honestly, now that you said that, it eerily does make sense of like, the plague was probably the most horrendous period in human history. And yet there's a lot of artwork dedicated to the remembrance of the plague and
Hmm.
what it means and how it impacted Renaissance art, and not just specifically Renaissance art in Italy, but also the Northern Renaissance, which was
Oh yeah.
in France and Germany, which also doesn't get a lot of scholarship or discussion about.
Yeah, I think the parallels in some instances are pretty eerie. Um, because you have, this disease that not a lot of people know about. They don't know about the origin. They might know how it's coming about, causes a lot of death and destruction. And then at the end, people are coming out and they kind of want to rebuild this new world and they want to go back to a golden age and they want to find beauty and happiness again after being in this, dark, miserable lockdown period. I think there's a lot of social parallels to be drawn there between the two. And you're right, there's not as much on there's a bit more on like Dutch art and North Central European art. What's interesting to me is, and I actually have a really good friend. I'm giving a bunch of people's Instagram accounts today. I hope it's okay that I'm doing this.
Oh no, that's
Um,
perfectly fine.
I have a good friend, Kate. She's an art historian. I follow her on Instagram. She's working at the Louvre, and Kate Art History. You can follow her. But we were actually talking one day. We did a live together, and I was like, I don't really know much about French Renaissance. And she's like, yeah, it's because it seems like there wasn't really much of one, like as far as art is concerned. It's almost like French art goes from medieval straight into mannerism. And I'm like, that's crazy. And now she's an art historian, so she'd be able to tell you a lot more about that than I could. But I just find that absolutely fascinating.
Amazing,
Yeah.
absolutely incredible. And that kind of now perfectly segues into the two paths. We either work academically or we work federally. And
Hmm.
sometimes that works for most people, other times it doesn't. But what's also really prevalent is that we don't have discussion about how to build one's career as an historian beyond those two established paths. And we
Hmm.
kind of see this unknown or unorthodox middle path, which is including content creation and other forms of discussion. And some historians have been able to make a career off of that, but
Hmm.
we don't hear that as much. And we also don't kind of like, share the harsh truths that, as historians, it's not a get rich quick industry.
No.
And unfortunately, that is the case. And I've had to learn that myself, where I had to kind of build my own career as a historian, doing these interviews, writing
Sure.
articles, and so forth. So, Anne, I would like to hear your thought on this discussion of trying to build one's career in the historian field that's beyond the standards. Now, I know you are an academic, you are a professor at two universities, so you already have your established career. But I imagine with your students that you've been talking with and like seeing where they're at, some of them may not be that, by the way, how would I say that? Some of them may not be gearing towards working in the academic side or the federal side and want to
Sure.
make their own brand in history.
Sure. So I will say I do work at two universities, but I'm an adjunct at both. So adjuncts are part-timers. It can be a hard grind to find something full-time and to find something that's a bit more viable and sustainable. I do think though part of it also has to do with society in general and how we view topics like history, literature, philosophy, the humanities, right?
Mm,
We don't really place a lot of importance in the humanities at all. We tend to tell our kids to do something that will get them a job or to do something that will make them money. And for a long time, what we saw academically was pushing a lot of people into STEM, which is great, which is great. But I don't think we should be valuing STEM so much that other fields become obscured. Because after all, history, literature, philosophy, they create culture and they create civilization and they help us understand fundamentally who we are as people. And I think those are all noble pursuits as well. They might not give you any tangible money making skill, but they certainly give you the ability to think critically. They certainly give you the ability to empathize with people. They give you the ability to become a civically driven person who's interested in the world around them and helping society. And I think those are all important things too, to help the survival of a people and the survival of humanity as we know it.
hmm
So that's kind of a lofty response, but I think if you really love it, I hate the idea of discouraging people because it's not a quick money making job.
Right.
So I think if you love it and you really have a passion for it, you will find a way to make it work. So yes, the traditional ways are either federal jobs. Actually, even me, I interviewed with the FBI before I, started working in academics. And so there's federal jobs you can get, which are good jobs, or you can end up working in the academy, or you could do something like you've done, right? Do
hmm
something a bit more creative, podcasting, creating communities, writing and publishing and I think too, one of the things with I actually was just talking about this with a friend of mine. Um, because they were talking about, do you think it's good to publish? It was all my Instagram people. It was Byzantine Time Traveler. We were talking about whether it's good to be a historian and or can you be a good historian without necessarily having a PhD? And my answer was
Mm.
yeah, and my answer was absolutely. But I think what you need to do then is make sure you have good sources and that your research is thorough and sound. If you have good research skills and you are putting out good history, people will listen to you. So I think it's really about the research methodology. It's really about how thorough you're being when you're writing. And it's really about your approach to the field and, quite frankly, what you intend to accomplish for yourself. What do you want to do? Do you want to just write? Do you want to make content? Do you want to bridge with the world around you? Or, I mean, and if you do just want to write, great. I love just sitting in my room and writing and being left alone. Like, I think that's wonderful. Or, it's really about, I think, the standard you set for yourself and what your goal ultimately is, but really doing something that you have a passion for, because I don't think it's useful to force yourself into something that you don't really care about just because you think it'll give you a better future. Because the truth of the matter is, you might be better off doing the thing that might be a little harder, but that you actually care about. Because I
Right.
think when you're authentic and you care about it, people will be more willing to listen to you.
Absolutely. And you actually brought up a discussion that I had with fellow guests on the show, this debate of whether armchair historians, a term I've been seeing a lot, are considered historians because they're not academically trained. They don't
Mhm,
have, either a BA or MA or doctorate. But I talked with a lot of historians who are independent content creators who, as you said, they do the research, they
mhm,
cite their sources, and they
yeah,
create history which is factually true
mhm,
and yet still engaging, which that engagement leads into another discussion, which is understanding your audience.
mhm,
And I think as historians, it is very crucial because, as we talked about before, we are academically trained to speak and write in a certain way for our peers, our fellow academics. But when we go outside of the world of academia and interact with, the average Joe, we really have to understand, okay, they're not going to understand the jargon that we know. So we want to get our idea across where, yes, we are still making sense, but also it's easy to follow along. And some historians have argued, as I've talked with on the show, that they specifically target the academic side.
mhm,
Some have argued that they focus on the more broad side. But for
mhm.
you, Anne, and for your research in your scholarship articles and for your content creation, where do you find yourself? Like, how do you understand your audience?
Yeah, I think it depends what I'm writing and what I'm trying to do. So for my content, I try to bring in good sound historical ideas without necessarily being jargony, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there is a way, and actually there's and different fields do it a little bit differently. So one of my subfields in history was actually African history,
Mm,
and Africanists are brilliant at writing really theoretically dense books in ways that are very approachable. So I really like that method that they have, and I try to emulate it, even though I don't really do modern Africa in my research.
mm.
I hit more North Africa, like in the you know early modern period, because that's generally what I do. But um, I like the idea of being able, because I really think if you package it in the right language, everybody's capable of understanding it.
Right.
So I think you can have a lofty historical idea and present it to people in such a way that it's extremely approachable. Now, if I'm writing an article to try and get it into an academic journal,
Mm,
then, because my audience is different at that point, then it's an editorial board that's more than likely all got their PhDs, all at various high level universities, whether it's in the US or Europe, depending on which journal you're, applying to. Then I am going to write in a language that's a bit more academically driven. So I think it really just depends what the content is. For my book, what I'd like to do, the book I'm in the process of writing at the moment, I would like to show good, thorough, dense academic research and show you that I know that. But again, package it in a way that people can understand, because ultimately I'm writing a history that not a lot of people know about. And I just don't see the good in writing an obscure history in an obscure language. That's not the point. The point is to write a history that people will be able to connect with. So I'd like to skate the line if I can. I'd like to make it thoroughly shown that I know this research and that I understand these theoretical concepts behind it, but at the same time make it so, anybody, whether they're a really high academic level or not, can read it and find it interesting.
Absolutely. I'm actually glad you brought up your book, because I did want to talk about that briefly. I know you're still working on it and developing it, but just as a little teaser, what can we expect from this book of yours? And a little add-on question to that, what has been like this challenge of you want to showcase your identity as an historian, as the author, but you also want to show respect and relevance to the source material as well as the history written by others on this
Mhm.
topic?
Yeah. Great question. So I'll start with the first. So what I'm writing about in my book is I'm looking at 5 different Sicilian intellectuals, from starting from like the 1450s, into, we'll say 1600. We'll say 1450 to 1600. And I'm looking at the material they wrote, and I'm looking at their words, and I'm deciphering how they saw themselves, how they identified as Sicilians. Did they
Mm,
have a sense of Sicilian identity? If so, what was that identity, and how do they talk about it? Um, and I also show how the idea of Sicilian identity and what it means to be Sicilian changes from my earliest intellectual to the last one, right? Because I'm spanning about 150 years.
right.
So these identities are not static and they're not stuck, they're fluid and they change over time and they're all slightly different. So, what does it mean to be Sicilian? How did they write about being Sicilian? How did they see themselves? Because, especially in the 15th and 16th centuries, Sicily's part of the Spanish Habsburg Empire.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
how do they see themselves in contrast to the Spanish? How do they see themselves in contrast to Northern Italians? How do they see themselves in contrast to perhaps some lingering Muslim and Jewish communities that are still there? So how these ideas are developing, and then what it means and how that's influential later through Italian history. So that's what I'm looking at in my book. Um, as far as, I'm sorry, what was the second half of your question? I'm going to ask you to repeat it.
Of course. So the second half of the question was, what has sort of been like the struggle to, of course, show your identity and knowledge of the history as the author and historian, but also showing respect
Oh,
and
yeah.
relevance to the authors who have written about this topic or about these individual people separately beforehand?
Yeah. So what I think is really important to do, because ultimately, yes, I'm weaving together this narrative, but that's all I want to do. I only want to be the weaver of the narrative. I want my intellectuals, even though they're dead, to tell their own story.
Mm,
I want to put their voices forward. I want to show as much of what they're saying as humanly possible, because ultimately I want their ideas to shine, not mine. This is kind of, again, I'm being a little bit lofty here, but I really want to be more of a conduit for their voices
mm,
than, because I think they deserve to be heard. And then I can add my own analyses of what they're saying based on the historical context that I know, foregrounding them in their own historical environment. For example, um, one of the humanists I talk about, that I've actually written about and that I posted about on my channel, is Tommaso Fasello, right? And he's one of the ones that I'm going to cover. And Fasello was a Dominican theologian, historian, and cartographer. He did a lot of stuff. Certainly that training as a Dominican theologian and as a historian is going to affect how he writes and what he understands. Also understanding the fact that he's not just studied Sicily as a population and the population of the people, but he takes boats and he rides along the coastline and he discovers cities that were previously thought to be destroyed. One of them that exists today, Selinunte, for example.
Mhm.
He discovered the city of Selinunte. He discovered the old ruins. They were thought to have been destroyed during the Arab period, and Fazelo says, no, here they are, because of his love of cartography and geography and all of that. And that also colors his perception. It colors his perception about how he views the Muslim period. It colors his perception about how he views the Greek period. And so I want to give you the nuance of his world and the nuance of who he was, but I also want to give you as much of what he says. So to a degree, you can decide for yourself, and if you want to disagree with me, fine. You can disagree with my reading. That's perfectly fine. Maybe you see something that I don't. But I think it's really about being a historian enough to give you the context without obscuring the words of your subjects.
Nice. Very, very nice, Anne. And we're almost getting the end of this amazing historian's interview. So I'm going to combine the last two questions together into a very, very big one. So
Okay.
as context, yeah, don't worry, it's going to be good. So context to this question, I've been doing this show now for about 7 years, and I've had the opportunity to meet a wide range of authors and historians from different aspects of life, from different stages of their life, and it's incredible. And from these interactions, I've learned that, as historians, there's kind of like two paths for us: to be a historian and to be known as a historian. Both have their own goals and objectives and hurdles along the way. But in this industry, as we talked about, there is no guarantee that your first work is going to be the start of your career in the field of history. There's going to be some highs and lows, and there are going to be some exceptions to the rule, and that's okay. So, Anne, here is the question. With everything you've learned thus far and the people who have helped you along the way, how would you console someone who is an historian in the making, whether it's a student or an independent creator who's making their name for themselves, and helping them understand that, yeah, just because your initial project didn't start off the way you wanted it, that doesn't mean you have to stop. You don't have to be everything all at once. You can grow and expand your career gradually and realistically.
Yeah, so I think one of the things I always heard when I was beginning the process of writing my dissertation was uh the only good dissertation is a done dissertation. Um
Mm,
because everybody knows it's expected that your dissertation is more of a work of showing what you've gained along the way and showing that you can synthesize a good history. Those ideas will change. Your theories will change. I look at my dissertation today and I'm like, oh, what did I write? Like a lot of us have this kind of like, oh my God, what did I write? So I think, again, if you're really driven and this is something you really want to do and you're determined to do it, you will. Understanding that everyone, I mean, one of my biggest concerns when I was writing my dissertation was the fact that I was in lockdown,
mm,
because I was like, oh my God, I can't travel anywhere. And let's face it, it's not like there's a whole bunch of 15th and 16th century Sicilian sources just around the northeastern United States, just like hanging out waiting for me to read, right?
nope.
So if I did need to go somewhere, that's going to be a nightmare because I can't. So I'm stuck. I was fortunate enough that I'd actually gotten a fellowship to go study in Sicily in the fall of 2018. So I had a bunch of materials from that. And quite frankly, you would be surprised what you can find digitized on Google Scholar. Like some of the big European libraries, like the State Library of Munich, actually had one of my sources from one of my Sicilian guys digitized, just sitting there on the internet. So I downloaded it on Google Books and I was able to read it on Google Books. So really scouring the internet can be very, very useful, and it takes time, but everyone's going to have pitfalls, and one of the things I remember is, so like I said, part of the reason I studied Sicilian history was because I grew up speaking Sicilian dialect, right?
Mhm.
But I grew up speaking a type of Sicilian dialect, one from Messina, because that's where my family's from. And two, my grandparents came here in the 1950s. So I really grew up with their dialect, which
Mm.
was a much more modern dialect. Two of my sources are only in Sicilian, but they're 16th century Sicilian,
Ah, okay.
right? So when I opened the first book, I'll never forget, I started reading it, and I was lucky enough that I was getting, like, I would say like 75%. Think of like you're a native English speaker, but it's your first time reading Shakespeare and like the original Shakespeare, right? And original Shakespearean. It can be a little bit daunting. It's a little bit different. You're not necessarily maybe getting every aspect of it. So there were a few words as I was reading this thing where I'm just like, oh my God, what the heck does this mean? You know, and I'm like deciphering off of context, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, well, I remember this word means this thing in my grandparents' dialect. So could it be a derivative of this thing in like this old 16th century dialect, right? So nobody's path is smooth. Everyone runs into problems.
Mhm.
It's just a matter of, I think at that point, having the desire to say, I've already invested 6 or 7 years of my life into this. Like, I can't just give up. And knowing that, believe me, there is not one person I've asked about their journey in academia who hasn't said there weren't at least several points that were quite miserable. So if you can get through the bad, you'll be all right.
Awesome. A perfect way to end this amazing historians interview. And with that, viewers and listeners, I want to give a huge thank you to our guest, Anne Maltempi, for making her official debut here on the show. We wish her the very best going forward into 2025. Now, Anne, where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out, as well as stay up to date with upcoming content of yours?
Absolutely. So you can find me on the Sicilian School on my Instagram page, just at the Sicilian School. I'm on Threads too, so you can definitely follow me on Threads. You can follow me on I have a YouTube channel called the Sicilian School. I wanted to do something more long form. Haven't gotten the chance to do it yet, but some of my shorts are up there, so you can definitely see some of my shorts if you want to follow my YouTube channel. And yeah, just keep up with me on social media, and anything new that comes along, you guys will be the first ones to know about it.
Absolutely. And also make sure to follow Eight Sicily, where
Yes.
Anne is also a part of with her colleagues who write scholarship on the history of Sicily in southern Italy. So I'll make sure to attach that link down below. And as always, viewers and listeners, thank you so much for joining us for another interview here on the channel. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And as always, a huge thank you to Anne, our guest, for making her official debut on the channel. And hopefully this isn't the last time we see her. Hopefully we'll have
Yep.
her back on the show for a Historians Lounge episode, maybe a special of season 3, or potentially being the headliner for season 4. Just make sure to follow both of our socials, stay up to date. And as always, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wishing you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. And until next time, we'll see you then.